I'm Cassie Andrews, 68 years old, sitting shell-shocked as Harold reads my Frank's will. 45 years of marriage ended 3 weeks ago with a heart attack, and now I'm watching my son James avoid eye contact while his wife Lydia seethes beside him. When Frank left me the struggling family ranch, Lydia exploded. "Get out of our lives and keep that old ranch," she spat, thinking she'd insulted me. I accepted in silence. 1 week later, what I found in the ranch's basement made my phone ring 62 times. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and subscribe for more stories of karma served cold. Frank and I were high school sweethearts. We met at Andrews County High when I dropped my books in the hallway and he stopped to help me pick them up. Our eyes met over my scattered copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, and that was it. By graduation, we were already planning our future together. We married young, just 20 and 21, but we knew what we wanted each other. For 45 beautiful years, we built a life on love and respect. Frank worked as a veterinarian in our small town of Millridge, dedicated to helping farmers with their livestock and families with their beloved pets. I found my calling as the school librarian, introducing generations of children to the magic of books. We never became wealthy, but we were comfortable and content with our modest lifestyle. The Andrews family ranch had been in Frank's family for 4 generations. Andrews Hill Ranch sprawled across 120 acres of rolling hills, with a Victorian farmhouse that had weathered more than a century of seasons. Frank's great-grandfather had built it with his own hands in 1875, and every Andrews since had added their touch to the property. Over the years, the ranch faced its share of challenges. Drought seasons came hard and stayed long. The local economy struggled as big agricultural businesses pushed out smaller operations. Frank received numerous offers from developers eager to turn the historic property into vacation homes or a golf resort, but he always refused. "This land tells our family story," he would say, looking out over the meadows. "Some things are worth more than money." Our son James grew up loving that land. As a boy, he would follow Frank around, learning about the crops, the history of the house, the old barn with its hand-hewn beams. James studied agricultural business in college, and Frank and I assumed he would eventually take over the ranch, modernize it perhaps, but keep it in the family. That was before Lydia. James met Lydia Turner during his final year of college. She came from money, lots of it, and worked as a successful real estate agent specializing in luxury properties. Stylish, ambitious, and sharp as a tack, Lydia swept James off his feet. I tried to be welcoming, but from the beginning Lydia made it clear that she found our lifestyle quaint, which wasn't a compliment coming from her glossy red lips. "You've done so well with what you have," she told me once, glancing around our comfortable but modest home with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "James and I will make sure you're taken care of when you're too old for all this upkeep." I was 58 at the time. After the wedding, James and Lydia bought a sleek, modern house in the affluent part of town. James took a job with an agricultural investment firm, wearing suits instead of the jeans and work boots I'd always associated with my son. They drove matching luxury cars, took vacations to tropical islands, and spent holidays at Lydia's parents' home rather than ours. When they did visit, Lydia would check her watch frequently, always having somewhere more important to be. In the last year of his life, Frank became intensely interested in the history of the ranch. He spent weekends there alone, saying he was working on maintenance, but I noticed changes in him. He became secretive, installing new locks on the basement door, and staying up late researching old maps and documents. When I asked about it, he would smile mysteriously and say, "Just following a hunch, Cassie girl. If it pans out, you'll be the first to know." I never got to hear what Frank discovered. On a cool spring morning, he drove out to the ranch alone. When he didn't return for dinner, I called our neighbor Daniel to check on him. Daniel found Frank collapsed in the old barn, his heart having given out while working on whatever project had consumed him. By the time the ambulance arrived, my Frank was gone. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and casseroles. James stood beside me, shell-shocked and pale. Lydia wore designer black and spent most of the service checking her phone discreetly. When it was over, she was the first to bring up settling matters. "We should meet with Harold about the will," she said, squeezing James's arm as mourners filed past the buffet in our dining room. The sooner everything is sorted, the sooner we can all move forward. I wanted to scream that I wasn't ready to move forward, that I was still trying to breathe through the crushing weight of Frank's absence, but I just nodded. In my grief, I still held hope that Frank had left something meaningful for our son. Something that might bring James back to us, to his roots. My best friend Maggie saw through Lydia's haste. "That woman is circling like a vulture," she whispered, as she helped me clean up after the funeral reception. "Frank was too smart to leave things where she could get her claws in them. Just wait and see." I didn't know then how right Maggie would be. 1 week after we laid Frank to rest, I sat in Harold Wilson's office downtown. The old building with its wood-paneled walls had housed the law practice for over 50 years. Harold had taken over from his father, just as Frank had taken over his father's veterinary practice. The waiting room displayed several landscape paintings of Andrews Hill that Frank had always admired. Harold welcomed us with solemn handshakes and gentle words of condolence. A tall, thin man with a shock of white hair, he had been Frank's friend since grade school and our family attorney for decades. He led us into his conference room, where a polished oak table gleamed beneath soft lighting. James sat beside me fidgeting with his wedding ring, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. Lydia took the seat on his other side, immaculately dressed in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She kept checking her diamond-studded watch, as though she had scheduled Frank's legacy between more important appointments. Harold adjusted his reading glasses and opened a thick folder. "Before I begin the formal reading of Frank's last will and testament, I want to say that Frank spent considerable time revising this document over the past year. He was very clear about his wishes." I noticed Lydia straighten in her chair, her red manicured nails tapping lightly against the table's surface. James stared at his hands. "To begin with the financial assets," Harold continued. "Frank's investments, savings accounts, and insurance policies are to be divided as follows: 50% to his beloved wife Cassie Andrews, and 50% to his son James Frank Andrews." Lydia's lips curved into a satisfied smile as Harold listed the substantial assets. Frank had been careful with money all his life, and the numbers added up to a comfortable sum. I barely registered the figures. No amount of money could fill the Frank-shaped hole in my heart. Regarding Frank's veterinary practice, Harold went on, he has left his partnership share to his longtime colleague, Dr. Robert Taylor, with the provision that the practice continue to serve the rural community at affordable rates. This didn't surprise me. Robert had worked alongside Frank for 20 years and shared his commitment to helping local farmers. Harold cleared his throat. "Now regarding real property. To my beloved wife Cassie, I leave Andrews Hill Ranch in its entirety, including all structures, equipment, land, and any contents therein." The room went silent. I felt James stiffen beside me. Lydia's smile vanished. Additionally, Harold continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension, "A trust has been established for the maintenance and property taxes of Andrews Hill Ranch for a period of 5 years, after which time Cassie may decide whether to maintain ownership or sell the property." What? Lydia's voice cut through the room like a knife. "That worthless old ranch. What about the house in town?" Harold looked up from the document. "The family home in town is to be sold with proceeds divided equally between Cassie and James." "That's it," Lydia demanded, color rising in her cheeks. "That decrepit ranch and half a house. What about the rest of the estate?" "I've outlined the distribution of all assets, Mrs. Andrews," Harold replied evenly. "This is ridiculous," Lydia spat, turning to me with accusing eyes. "What did you do? Manipulate him in his final days? That money should stay in the next generation, not go to someone who'll be gone in a decade." "Lydia, please," James murmured, looking mortified but not directly contradicting his wife. "I'm sorry you're disappointed," I said quietly, though my heart was breaking at her cruelty and my son's silence. "Disappointed. I'm outraged. That ranch is a money pit. The maintenance alone will eat through any inheritance." Lydia stood abruptly, gathering her designer handbag. "James, we're getting our own lawyer. This is clearly not what Frank would have wanted." Harold removed his glasses slowly. "I can assure you, Mrs. Andrews, that Frank was of sound mind when he made these decisions. He discussed them with me at length, and his wishes were quite clear." "Well, You can keep your precious dirt farm, Lydia said, glaring at me. Get out of our lives and keep that old ranch. At least we got the money that matters. She stormed out, leaving James looking torn between following his wife and staying with his grieving mother. After a moment's hesitation, he squeezed my hand awkwardly. I'm sorry, Mom. She's just upset. I'll talk to her. Then he too was gone, hurrying after Lydia without looking back. The door closed behind them, leaving Harold and me alone in the suddenly quiet room. The older man sighed heavily. I'm sorry about that, Cassie. Frank anticipated there might be some resistance. It's all right, Harold. Frank left them half of everything. I don't understand why Lydia's so angry about the ranch. Harold leaned forward, lowering his voice, though we were alone. Frank left something else for you. He asked me to give this to you privately. He handed me an envelope and a small leather pouch containing several unusual keys. None looked like typical house or car keys. They were older, heavier, with intricate patterns. Frank said you'd understand when the time was right, Harold explained. And Cassie, for what it's worth, Frank knew exactly what he was doing with the ranch. He was very insistent about it. I thanked Harold and left his office, the envelope and keys weighing heavily in my purse. The drive home was lonely, the passenger seat empty, where Frank should have been discussing the meeting, planning our next steps together. Our house, soon to be sold, felt hollow without him. That night I opened Frank's letter with trembling hands. His familiar handwriting brought fresh tears. My dearest Cassie, if you're reading this, I didn't get to share my discovery with you in person, and for that I'm deeply sorry. What began as curiosity about family history led me to something extraordinary at the ranch. The basement holds our legacy, something worth more than gold. Follow my journal notes. They'll guide you to what I found. Trust yourself, and remember that true wealth isn't always what it seems. All my love, always, Frank. I held the letter to my heart, wondering what secrets awaited me at Andrews Hill Ranch. The weeks following the will reading passed in a flurry of painful changes. James and Lydia wasted no time putting the family home on the market, hiring an aggressive real estate agent who specialized in quick sales. I was given 3 weeks to pack up 45 years of memories and decide what to take to the ranch. I spent those days sorting through photos, books, and mementos alone. Occasionally James would stop by, but he always seemed uncomfortable, checking his phone frequently and making excuses to leave quickly. Lydia, however, was a constant presence, supervising the process as though I might smuggle out valuables. You can't possibly need all these books, she said one afternoon, eyeing my collection with distaste. The ranch house probably has mold issues. They'll be ruined. They're just books to you, I replied carefully, wrapping my first edition of Pride and Prejudice that Frank had given me on our 10th anniversary. To me, they're chapters of my life. She rolled her eyes. This hoarding mentality is exactly why older people struggle to downsize appropriately. I was 68, not 98, but I bit my tongue. Frank would have wanted me to maintain dignity even when others didn't. One day, as I packed in the study, I overheard Lydia on the phone in the kitchen. Once we sell this place, she'll realize that ranch is a money pit and sell too. Give her 6 months tops. Then we can approach her about selling to Henderson Development. The commission on 120 acres will set us up nicely. So, that was the plan? Wait for me to fail, then swoop in to profit from my desperation. The knowledge hardened something in me. Whatever Frank had found at the ranch, I was now determined to discover it. On a crisp fall morning, I drove through the gates of Andrews Hill Ranch, with my car packed to the brim and my cat Ginger meowing plaintively from her carrier. The Victorian farmhouse looked more dilapidated than I remembered, its white paint, peeling shutters hanging askew, wraparound porch sagging in places. But behind it, the rolling hills stretched toward mountains painted in autumn colors, a view that had captivated Frank's family for generations. The inside of the house was dusty and outdated. Some furniture remained covered in sheets, ghostly remnants of a bygone era. The plumbing groaned, the roof leaked in 2 places, and the kitchen appliances were at least 30 years old. But it was mine now, this piece of Andrew's history, and somewhere within its walls lay whatever secret Frank had discovered. Strangely, while the house showed its age, I noticed newer additions, The electrical system had been completely upgraded with modern circuit breakers and outlets. A sophisticated security system had been installed on all doors and windows. Frank had clearly invested in these improvements recently, though I couldn't fathom why he'd prioritize electricity and security over the leaking roof. My first evening was interrupted by a knock at the door. I opened it to find an older gentleman with weathered features and kind eyes standing on my porch. Daniel Green, he introduced himself with a tip of his cap. Lived just down the road. I was Frank's friend, helped him out around here sometimes. Thought you might need a hand getting settled. Daniel proved to be a godsend. A retired engineer with a knack for fixing things, he helped me restore running water, patch the leaky roof, and get the ancient furnace working before the first frost hit. During our work, he shared observations that piqued my curiosity. Frank had me help him run new electric lines to the basement last year. Daniel mentioned as we replaced a broken window. Ordered special equipment too. Industrial-grade dehumidifiers, temperature control systems. Said he was setting up a workshop, but never showed me what for. Did he mention what he was working on, I asked, trying to sound casual. Not specifically. There were deliveries, though. Concrete steel reinforcement bars, security locks. And he had me help him drill through some mighty thick stone walls down there. Daniel wiped his brow. Come to think of it, he was reading a lot of old books, too. Civil War history, local records, that sort of thing. My exploration of the house revealed Frank's office a room he'd clearly spent significant time in recently. Maps covered the walls, some yellowed with age, others new printouts with Frank's handwriting all over them. Bookshelves overflowed with historical volumes about the region, the Civil War, and genealogy research, tracing the Andrews family back to the 1800s. The most intriguing find was Frank's journal hidden in a locked drawer that one of the unusual keys from Harold opened. The pages contained cryptic notes about something called the Conductor's Path and references to Station 7. Dates from the 1860s appeared throughout, alongside names I didn't recognize. A detailed diagram of the basement showed marked areas with notations like original foundation and secondary wall, circa 1859. Photos were paperclipped to several pages, close-ups of old metal objects, fragments of letters, and what appeared to be a hidden door mechanism. The final entry, dated just 3 days before Frank's death, read, "Found confirmation in Samuel's journals. The family stories were true. Tomorrow I finish the security system for the collection room." That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bedroom, listening to the house settle around me, the magnitude of my situation hit me. I was alone, nearly 70, starting over in a crumbling farmhouse, estranged from my only child with only cryptic clues left by my late husband. The grief I'd been holding at bay crashed over me in waves, and I sobbed into my pillow until exhaustion finally pulled me into sleep. Morning brought a call from Lydia, her voice sharp and demanding. "James needs you to sign these papers, releasing the additional funds from the house sale. We've got a buyer already. I'll email them over. Make sure you sign today." No greeting, no inquiry about how I was managing, just demands. "I'll review them first," I replied, finding strength in my growing suspicion that Frank had left me something important. "Don't be difficult, Cassie. We all want to move on with our lives." After she hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee from a chipped mug and staring at Frank's journal. My husband had spent his final months working on something he clearly valued deeply. I owed it to him to at least try to understand what it was. That afternoon, Maggie arrived with groceries, cleaning supplies, and her no-nonsense attitude. "This place has potential," she declared, looking around the dusty living room. "Now show me what Frank was up to. That man never did anything without a good reason." Together we pored over the journal maps and books. Maggie's background as a history teacher proved invaluable as she recognized references I'd missed. "The Underground Railroad," she said, tapping a page with Frank's notes about conductors and stations. "Cassie, I think Frank discovered that this property was part of the Underground Railroad network that helped escaped slaves reach freedom before the Civil War." It made sense, the secluded location, the references to Station 7, the old construction of the basement. Frank had been researching his own family's role in this crucial piece of American history. But why the security system? I wondered. Why all the secrecy? Let's find out, Maggie said, her eyes gleaming with the excitement of historical discovery. Frank left these clues for you. He wanted you to follow them. With renewed purpose, I decided to honor Frank's last project, whatever it was. If this was his legacy, I would uncover it, protect it, and perhaps in the process find a way forward in my new life. For the next week, I dedicated myself to understanding Frank's research and exploring the old house systematically. Each room revealed small clues. A loose floorboard with a Civil War-era newspaper clipping underneath a section of wall that sounded hollow when tapped, markings on doorframes that appeared to be part of a navigational system within the house. The basement became my focus, as Frank's journal indicated this was where his most significant discoveries had occurred. Unlike the rest of the house, portions of the basement had undergone meticulous renovation. New electrical wiring, reinforced walls, and a sophisticated ventilation system had been installed in specific areas, while other sections remained untouched with dirt floors and rough stone walls dating back to the original construction. Following the diagram in Frank's journal, I traced what he called the conductor's path, a route through the basement that led to an old storage area. According to his notes, this unassuming room held the key to everything. At first glance, it contained nothing but ancient shelving units filled with dusty mason jars and broken farm equipment. Look for anomalies in the construction, Frank's journal advised. The entrance was designed to disappear into the ordinary. After hours of careful examination, I noticed something odd about one shelving unit. Unlike the others built directly against the wall, this one had a slight gap behind it. The shelves also appeared to be fixed in place, while others were adjustable. When I pressed on certain spots, as indicated in Frank's diagram, I heard a faint click. With trembling hands, I pulled the shelving unit forward, revealing it was mounted on hidden hinges. Behind it lay a sophisticated door with a complex locking mechanism that matched one of the unusual keys Harold had given me. The key turned smoothly, and the door swung open to reveal a climate-controlled room that hadn't existed when I last visited the ranch 2 years ago. Frank had built this recently, and what I found inside took my breath away. The room was a museum-quality space, with glass display cases, archival storage containers, and framed documents on the walls. Motion-sensitive lighting activated as I entered, illuminating a collection of Civil War-era artifacts preserved in perfect condition. There were leather-bound journals, yellowed letters, period clothing, household items, and a small chest containing gold coins from the mid-19th century. The centerpiece was a collection of journals dating from 1860 to 1865, written by Frank's great-great-grandfather Samuel Andrews. The pages chronicled Andrews Hill's role as Station 7 on the Underground Railroad, a safe house where escaped slaves could rest before continuing their journey north to freedom. The 15th of August 1862, one entry read, "3 souls arrived tonight guided by the North Star and Jackson's signal. The woman Mary was injured, but refused to delay. Her determination to reach her children already in Canada burns stronger than her fever. We will hide them in the root cellar until the patrol passes." The journals detailed how Samuel had constructed hidden rooms and passages throughout the property spaces, designed to disappear behind ordinary farm life. Some of these hiding places had preserved their contents for over a century and a half untouched until Frank discovered them. Among the artifacts were personal possessions left behind by those who had passed through: a hand-carved wooden doll, a tarnished wedding band, a carefully folded scrap of fabric with embroidered initials. Each item represented someone's journey to freedom, preserved now as testimony to their courage and the Andrews family's role in helping them. But what truly astonished me was the historical significance of some documents. Letters from known abolitionists thanking Samuel Andrews for his assistance. Correspondence that mentioned Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. A letter signed by a young congressman who would later serve in Lincoln's cabinet. These weren't just family heirlooms, they were historical treasures of national importance. The gold coins and other valuable artifacts appeared to have been donations from wealthy Northern supporters of the Underground Railroad, given to help fund the dangerous operation. According to Samuel's records, he had hidden them when Confederate sympathizers threatened to raid the property, and they had remained concealed until Frank uncovered them. Tears streamed down my face as I realized what Frank had discovered, not just our family's legacy of courage and compassion, but a priceless historical collection that connected Andrews Hill to one of the most important humanitarian efforts in American history. I immediately called Maggie, my voice shaking with emotion. "You need to see this. Bring Thomas Reynolds from the Historical Society." Frank found something incredible. Thomas arrived with Maggie within the hour, his academic demeanor giving way to childlike wonder as I showed him the hidden room and its contents. A professor of 19th century American history at the local college, Thomas understood immediately what we were looking at. "This is extraordinary," he breathed carefully, examining a letter. "This may be the most significant Underground Railroad discovery in decades. The preservation is remarkable, and the documentation. To have the actual journals of a conductor detailing operations with names and dates. Historians have been searching for collections like this for years." "What should I do with it all?" I asked, overwhelmed by the responsibility. "First, we need to document everything properly. Then contact the State Historical Society immediately for guidance on preservation." Thomas looked at me earnestly. "Mrs. Andrews, you need to understand what you have here. This collection is priceless, both historically and financially. It will attract attention." He wasn't wrong. By that evening, word had somehow leaked to the local community. My phone began ringing incessantly. Messages filled my voicemail from museums, collectors, historians, and reporters, all eager to learn about the Andrews Underground Railroad discovery. By the end of the day, I had received 62 calls. Local news vans appeared at the front gate. People I'd never met claimed distant connections to the Andrews family seeking access. Even the county commissioner called offering assistance with managing the situation. As darkness fell, Sheriff Parker arrived to help manage the growing crowd of curiosity seekers attempting to photograph the property. "Might want to consider staying elsewhere tonight, Mrs. Andrews," he suggested. "Once news like this breaks, it tends to take on a life of its own." I stood on the porch watching headlights illuminate the road to the ranch, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden intrusion into what had been intense but private grief and discovery. What would Frank have wanted me to do with his discovery? How could I protect this legacy he'd worked so hard to preserve? My phone rang again. "James?" "Mom, what's going on?" His voice sounded tense. "Lydia's been getting calls about some kind of historical discovery at the ranch. She wants to know what you found." Of course she did. I thought of her dismissive words at the will, reading her certainty that the ranch was worthless, her plans to wait for me to fail so she could profit from the land. "It's complicated, James," I replied carefully. "Your father discovered something important about the family history. I'm still figuring out what it means. Lydia says if it's valuable, it should have been included in the estate inventory." His voice dropped. "She's pretty upset, Mom." I closed my eyes, suddenly bone-tired. "The ranch and everything in it was left to me, James. That was your father's decision." The line went quiet for a moment. "We're coming out there tomorrow. Lydia wants to see whatever this is for herself." After we hung up, I sat in Frank's office, surrounded by his research, the distant noise of vehicles and voices filtering through the old windows. Whatever calm period of grief and adjustment I might have had was over. The siege had begun. By morning, Andrews Hill Ranch had transformed from a quiet, forgotten property to the center of a media frenzy. News vans lined the rural road, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like strange mechanical flowers. Helicopters from larger stations in the city buzzed overhead, trying to capture aerial footage of the property. Trespassers slipped through the woods, hoping to photograph the house or outbuildings, despite Sheriff Parker's deputies patrolling the perimeter. My phone continued its relentless ringing. Representatives from the Smithsonian, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and 3 state historical societies all reached out offering assistance with documentation and preservation. University historians requested access for research purposes. Private collectors made substantial cash, offers some reaching 7 figures without even seeing the full extent of the collection. Daniel arrived early, concern etched on his weathered face. Thought you might need reinforcements, he said, handing me a fresh thermos of coffee. Quite the circus out there. By mid-morning, a team from the State Historical Society had arrived, led by Dr. Eleanor Washington, a distinguished curator, specializing in African American history. After signing confidentiality agreements, they began the painstaking process of cataloging and properly preserving the artifacts. The condition of these items is remarkable, Dr. Washington commented, carefully examining Samuel Andrews' journals. Your husband created a perfect preservation environment. The temperature and humidity control the archival quality storage. He knew exactly what he was doing. As the experts worked, I spotted a familiar car pulling up to the gate where Sheriff Parker's deputy was screening visitors. Lydia's sleek luxury SUV with James in the passenger seat. After a brief exchange with the deputy, they were allowed through. Lydia burst into the house without knocking, James trailing behind her. She was dressed as though for a business meeting in a tailored pantsuit, her face set in determined lines. "Where is it? What have you found?" she demanded without preamble. "Hello to you too, Lydia." James. I remained seated at the kitchen table, refusing to be bulldozed in my own home. "Cut the pleasantries, Cassie. Half the state is talking about some valuable historical discovery. As Frank's son James has a right to know what's going on." Frank left detailed instructions about his discovery, I replied evenly. "I'm following them." "Show us," Lydia insisted, looking around, as though expecting to see gold bars stacked in the corner. After a moment's consideration, I nodded. They would find out eventually, and perhaps seeing the historical significance might help James understand his father's decision. I led them down to the basement and through the hidden door into the preservation room. "Doctor?" Washington and her team paused in their work, watching curiously as Lydia's expression transformed from skepticism to shock to calculation. Gold coins, original documents. Her eyes darted from case to case, mentally tallying values. This must be worth millions. Why wasn't this disclosed during the estate settlement? "Because Frank left the ranch and all its contents to Mom," James said quietly, surprising me. He was staring at an open journal, reading his ancestors' words with growing wonder. Dad knew about this when he made his will. "This changes everything," Lydia insisted. "These artifacts shouldn't belong to just one person. They're part of the Andrews family legacy. James should have equal claim. The Historical Society believes many of these items should eventually go to a museum," I explained. "I'm working with experts to determine the best course of action." "Museums? Are you crazy?" Lydia's voice rose. "Private collectors would pay a fortune for these items. We need to get appraisals immediately." "These aren't trinkets to be sold to the highest bidder," I found myself saying, a strength in my voice I hadn't felt since Frank died. "They represent people's journeys to freedom and our family's role in helping them. Frank wanted them preserved and protected." "You don't get to make that decision alone," Lydia snapped. "Actually, she does," Sheriff Parker said from the doorway. I hadn't noticed him come in. "Mrs. Andrews is the legal owner of this property and everything in it. And right now you're trespassing in a secure area without authorization." "This is ridiculous." "James, say something." Lydia turned to my son, who was still absorbed in the journals. "Dad left this to Mom for a reason," James said, finally looking up. "We should respect his wishes." "Whose side are you on?" Lydia hissed. "There shouldn't be sides, Lydia. This is my family's history." Sheriff Parker stepped forward. "I'm going to have to ask you both to leave the secure area. The Historical Society has exclusive access permission right now." "This isn't over," Lydia said, glaring at me as Sheriff Parker escorted them upstairs. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer." They left, but Lydia's threat hung in the air. Sure enough, by afternoon, Harold called to inform me that Lydia had consulted an attorney who specialized in estate challenges. "They don't have much of a case," Harold assured me. "Frank's will was explicit. But they might cause delays and complications with the historical preservation process." The next day brought an unexpected visitor, my sister Amanda. We had grown apart over the years, our relationship damaged by misunderstandings and geographical distance, exacerbated by Lydia's subtle manipulations that had kept family gatherings tense and infrequent. "I saw the news," Amanda said, standing awkwardly on the porch. Thought you might need family right now. Real family. Our tearful reconciliation was a bright spot in the chaos. Amanda, a retired nurse with organizational skills honed by decades in hospital administration, offered not just emotional support, but practical help managing the growing circus around the discovery. Daniel continued to be a steadfast presence helping secure the property and developing a friendship that gave me unexpected comfort. His dry humor and practical approach to problems reminded me of Frank in ways that soothed rather than sharpened my grief. Professional assessment of the collection's value came in higher than anyone expected. The artifacts, documents, and gold coins together were worth 8 figures, not counting the historical significance that made some items essentially priceless. A week into the siege, James appeared at the ranch alone, looking haggard and conflicted. Lydia gave me an ultimatum, he confessed, as we sat on the porch swing. Said I had to choose between supporting her claims on the artifacts or, he swallowed hard, or my marriage. My heart broke for my son trapped between loyalty to his wife and the pull of his family heritage that he was only now beginning to fully appreciate. I'm sorry I haven't been around much since Dad died, he continued. Lydia thought we should give you space, but honestly I was just avoiding the grief. And now, all this. He gestured toward the collection room. Your father wanted to share this with you, I said gently. His journals mention hoping you would appreciate the family's role in history. James nodded, tears in his eyes. I'm starting to. But Lydia sees dollar signs, not history. She's filed for an emergency injunction to prevent you from disposing of valuable assets until the court reviews the estate. The injunction led to an emergency court hearing 2 days later. I sat beside Harold, watching Lydia's attorney present dramatic arguments about hidden assets and fiduciary responsibility. When my turn came, I simply told the truth. Frank had discovered our family's historical legacy and left specific instructions for its preservation. The judge, an elderly woman with shrewd eyes, ruled decisively in my favor. The will clearly states that Mrs. Andrews received the ranch and all its contents. There is no evidence of fraud or concealment during the estate process. The injunction is denied. Outside the courthouse, Lydia's composure finally shattered. This is theft, she shouted as reporters gathered. That collection belongs to the Andrews family, not just her. You said it was a worthless old ranch, I reminded her quietly, cameras capturing our exchange. You told me to get out of your lives and keep it. Her face contorted with rage. You smug, manipulative old woman. You won't get away with this. I'll appeal all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. As she stormed off, James lingered behind looking torn. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know what to do. Watching my son walk away to his angry wife, I felt a strange new emotion cutting through my grief determination. Frank had entrusted this legacy to me, not because I was his widow, but because he trusted my judgment. For the first time since his death, I felt certain about the path forward. The siege would continue, but I would not surrender. 2 weeks after the discovery, I convened a meeting at Andrews Hill Ranch with representatives from the Historical Society, several museums, and preservation experts. We gathered around the dining room table where generations of Andrews family meals had been shared, now covered with conservation reports, artifact inventories, and preliminary educational proposals. The collection presents a unique opportunity, Dr. Washington explained, spreading out concept drawings. With proper funding and management, Andrews Hill Ranch could become a living history museum, preserving not just the artifacts, but the actual site where this underground railroad station operated. Her team had developed a comprehensive plan to create the Andrews Underground Railroad Museum at the ranch, preserving the historical structures while adding modern educational facilities. The majority of artifacts would be professionally conserved and displayed with the most fragile documents digitized for research access. The gold coins and certain high-value items could be sold to establish an endowment for ongoing operations, suggested Thomas Reynolds, who had become my trusted advisor. That would ensure the ranch's sustainability without compromising the historical integrity of the core collection. The plan resonated with what I believed Frank would have wanted: preservation of our family's legacy, education for future generations, and sustainable management of the property. After careful consideration, I gave my approval. "We'll need to move quickly," Dr. Washington cautioned. "The media attention has already attracted interest from private collectors who might not share our preservation goals." She was right. That same day, I received a call from an attorney representing Henderson Development, the company Lydia had mentioned to her friend. They offered an 8-figure sum for the entire property, including all artifacts, with plans to create a luxury historical resort that would highlight elements of the Underground Railroad experience. The commercialization of such profound history turned my stomach. The following week, I held a press conference announcing plans for the Andrews Underground Railroad Museum. Standing on the porch of the farmhouse surrounded by historians and preservation experts, I shared the vision for honoring both the freedom seekers who had passed through the property and those who had risked everything to help them. "This discovery isn't just Andrews' family history," I told the assembled reporters. "It's American history, a testament to courage and compassion during one of our nation's darkest periods. My late husband Frank uncovered this legacy, and I'm committed to preserving it for future generations." The community response was overwhelmingly positive. Local businesses pledged support for the museum project. Schools requested educational programs. Historical tourism experts predicted the museum could revitalize the region's economy while preserving its cultural heritage. James attended the press conference standing quietly at the back but making his presence known. Afterward, he approached me hesitantly. "I want to help, Mom. This matters to me too. It's our family's story." "What about Lydia?" I asked, bracing for his answer. His expression clouded. "She's not happy with my decision. She still wants to challenge the will, but I refuse to be part of it. I told her Dad wanted this preserved, not sold off in pieces. And she left. Said she needed time to think about whether our marriage could survive my betrayal." The pain in his eyes was evident, but there was also relief, as though a heavy burden had been lifted. Days later, we discovered Lydia hadn't just been thinking, she had been plotting. Through business contacts, she had approached several private collectors, attempting to arrange advance sales of artifacts once she gained control through legal challenges. She had even met with county officials seeking to block the historical landmark designation that would protect the property. Her schemes backfired spectacularly. The attempted interference actually accelerated the Historical Society's efforts. Within a month, Andrews Hill Ranch received emergency historical landmark status, providing additional legal protection against development or significant alteration. While the legal battles continued in the background, restoration work began on the farmhouse and hidden rooms. Architectural historians made additional discoveries during the process, uncovering evidence of ingenious ventilation systems and acoustic warning mechanisms that had allowed the Underground Railroad station to operate successfully. James moved into the caretaker's cottage on the property, volunteering his business expertise to help develop the museum's operational plan. Free from Lydia's influence, he reconnected with his roots, spending hours reading Samuel's journals and helping catalog family photographs and documents. Dad tried to tell me about all this. He confessed one evening as we sorted through Frank's research materials. "Last Christmas, he showed me some of his preliminary findings, but I was distracted, had a business call I thought couldn't wait. Now I'd give anything for that time back." "He knew you'd understand eventually," I assured him. "That's why he made sure all this would be preserved until you were ready to see it." 6 weeks after the discovery, we held a preliminary opening event for donors and historical experts. The farmhouse's main floor had been restored to its Civil War-era appearance with educational displays explaining the Underground Railroad's operations. The hidden room in the basement now featured museum-quality conservation equipment and viewing areas for researchers. As guests mingled in the parlor exclaiming over the transformation, a commotion erupted at the front door. Lydia had arrived uninvited, attempting to force her way past the student volunteers checking invitations. "This should be mine too," she shouted, her designer clothes and perfect makeup contrasting with her undignified behavior. "My husband is an Andrews. These artifacts belong to his family." Sheriff Parker gently but firmly escorted her out as she continued her tirade threatening lawsuits and media exposés. The guests watched in embarrassed silence until Dr. Twelfie Washington smoothly redirected attention to a newly discovered hidden compartment in the parlor fireplace. That evening, after everyone had left James, and I sat on the porch swing exhausted but satisfied with the day's success. "I got served with divorce papers yesterday," he said quietly, staring out at the darkening fields. "Lydia's asking for everything, claiming I abandoned our marriage for a pile of old junk," as she put it. "I'm so sorry, James." He shook his head. "Don't be. It's been over for a long time. I just couldn't admit it. All Lydia ever really wanted was status and money. When Dad left the ranch to you instead of me, she saw it as losing a potential windfall. When the artifacts were discovered, it just made her more determined." The next day brought a documentary crew from a national historical channel eager to film the restoration and tell the story of Andrews Hill. I found myself becoming the unexpected guardian, not just of physical artifacts, but of the narratives they represented, the voices from the past that deserved to be heard. As winter settled over the ranch, I found a new rhythm to my days. Mornings spent with historians and museum designers, afternoons reviewing educational materials or grant applications, evenings with James, or sometimes Daniel, whose friendship had deepened into something that made my heart feel young again. My sister Amanda decided to move from Arizona to a small house just down the road, strengthening our reconciliation and providing another ally in the ongoing work of creating the museum. Together we were building not just an institution, but a reclaimed family bound by shared purpose and growing love. Frank's vision was taking shape, transforming from personal discovery to public treasure. The ranch, once a burden Lydia had mockingly left me with, had become a blessing beyond measure, connecting past to future in ways none of us could have imagined. 6 months after that fateful will, reading Andrews Hill Ranch welcomed visitors to the grand opening of the Andrews Underground Railroad Museum. The Victorian farmhouse stood proudly restored, its white clapboard gleaming in the spring sunshine. The wraparound porch, once sagging and neglected, now hosted rocking chairs where docents in period clothing shared stories with visitors. The surrounding acres had been thoughtfully landscaped to highlight both the working farm aspects of the 19th century property and the natural features that had helped conceal those seeking freedom. Inside, the transformation was even more remarkable. Modern museum design complemented the historical architecture, creating immersive exhibits that told the story of the Underground Railroad through the specific experiences at Station 7. Interactive displays allowed visitors to understand the challenges faced by both freedom seekers and those who assisted them. Carefully preserved artifacts in state-of-the-art cases brought history to life in tangible ways. Samuel Andrews's journals formed the heart of the collection, their pages digitized and accessible through touchscreens that protected the fragile originals while making their contents available to all. Alongside them, Frank's research journals documented the rediscovery process, honoring his dedication to uncovering and preserving this crucial history. A memorial plaque in the main hall paid tribute to Frank. His curiosity uncovered the past. His wisdom preserved it for the future. Each time I passed it, I felt his presence, his satisfaction that the family legacy had found its proper place in history. James had found his purpose as the museum's site manager, combining his business acumen with his newfound passion for history. The painful divorce from Lydia had been finalized, leaving him financially strained but spiritually richer. He had taken an apartment in town, but spent most days at the ranch, overseeing operations and occasionally leading tours himself. "Dad would be amazed to see what we've accomplished," he told me, as we watched a school group explore the exhibits. I finally understand why this mattered so much to him. My own role had evolved into that of storyteller and historian. Visitors often gathered around as I shared personal anecdotes about Frank's discovery process or insights into the Andrews family history. At 68, I had found an unexpected second chapter to my life, one filled with purpose and connection. Daniel had become a constant presence, his technical expertise invaluable to maintaining the property, his quiet companionship warming my evenings. Our relationship had blossomed slowly, respectful of my grief for Frank, while acknowledging the growing affection between us. At 72, he joked that we were late bloomers, but perhaps just the right age to appreciate second chances. My sister Amanda had become the museum's volunteer coordinator, her organizational skills creating a thriving program that engaged community members of all ages. Our renewed relationship had healed old wounds, bringing us closer than we had been since childhood. The museum had transformed not just the ranch, but the surrounding community. Tourism brought new life to local businesses. Schools incorporated the history into their curricula. Descendants of those who had passed through Station 7 occasionally visited, adding their family stories to our growing archive. A month after the opening, I received an unexpected letter. The elegant stationery and flowing handwriting were unmistakably Lydia's, though the postmark showed she had moved to another state. "I won't pretend to apologize for fighting for what I believed was rightfully James's," she wrote. "But I will acknowledge that my plans for the property would have destroyed something irreplaceable. Since leaving Millridge, I've faced financial difficulties I never anticipated. The divorce settlement wasn't what I expected, and my real estate business has suffered from the negative publicity. Perhaps there's a lesson in that." It was as close to an admission of error as Lydia would ever make, a reluctant recognition that her greed had cost her everything truly valuable: her marriage, her reputation, her community standing. James, meanwhile, was cautiously beginning to date again. He had met Catherine, a kind-hearted elementary school teacher who brought her classes to the museum and stayed after hours to learn more about the history. Her genuine interest in the Andrews legacy, and her warm manner with both James and me, suggested possibilities for healing and new beginnings. With the proceeds from the sale of certain artifacts, we had established a trust to maintain the museum and its educational programs in perpetuity. The financial security allowed us to focus on expanding our outreach and research efforts rather than worrying about operational costs. On quiet evenings, I often sat on the porch swing Frank had built decades ago, looking out over the land that had been in his family for generations. From burden to blessing, from hidden history to shared legacy, the journey of Andrews Hill Ranch mirrored my own transformation, from grieving widow to purposeful custodian of the past. The lesson had become clear: what truly matters isn't money or possessions, but the stories we preserve, the connections we nurture, and the legacy we leave behind. Frank had understood this in his final year, working tirelessly to uncover our family's role in helping others achieve freedom. In leaving me the ranch, he hadn't been saddling me with a burden, but entrusting me with a treasure whose value Lydia, in her materialistic worldview, could never comprehend. Now surrounded by authentic relationships, meaningful work, and the knowledge that our family had stood on the right side of history, I felt a sense of peace Frank would have appreciated. The greedy always lose what matters most, while those who give freely gain immeasurable wealth of spirit. As visitors continue to discover the Andrews Underground Railroad Museum, they connect past struggles for freedom with present-day lessons about courage, compassion, and the true meaning of wealth. And I, Cassie Andrews, once devastated by loss and rejection, have found my own liberation from grief through preserving the legacy Frank entrusted to me. Have you ever discovered something valuable that others overlooked? Share your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life lessons, and remember that sometimes what appears to be our greatest burden can become our most precious blessing. Thank you for listening to my story today, and may you recognize the true treasures in your own life.